Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin, and I'm here with our wonderful guest, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes. How are you, sir?
Mark, it's great to be here. Yeah,
it's a pleasure to finally meet you.
And congratulations on your new show.
Thank you. Thank you. You were born in Tulare, California. Your family is of Portuguese descent. You immigrated from the Azores to California. You worked on a farm as a child. Your family farm operated in Tulare County, 3 generations. You raised cattle as a teenager, used your savings to begin a harvesting business. Then you bought your own farmland, and now you're a congressman.
That's right. That's right.
That's the American dream, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
We have good people in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yes, you do. Now, let's jump right into this. As chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, did the Obama administration spy on the Trump campaign?
I think it's pretty clear. I think average Americans understand that that happened.
Mm-hmm.
To what degree, it's hard to know because the proper investigations haven't been done. But it started with unmaskings. There were unmaskings of Trump transition officials that I think are still questionable. We don't know if that's been investigated yet or not. And then if you look at the culmination now that we found out about the use of the dossier and the tracking of Carter Page, where Carter Page could have had emails that were intercepted that could have come from the Trump campaign. So I think there was a pretty strong effort to spy on the campaign.
Well, let's start from the beginning. So I went back and I looked at several stories from a site called Heat Street back on November 7, 2016, the day before the general election, the day before. And they write 2 separate sources with links to the counterintelligence community have confirmed to Heat Street that the FBI sought and was granted a FISA court warrant in October giving counterintelligence permission to examine the activities of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. They go on. Contrary to earlier reporting in the New York Times, which cited FBI sources as saying the agency did not believe that the private server in Donald Trump's Trump Tower, which was connected to a Russian bank, had any nefarious purpose, the FBI's counterintelligence arm, sources say, redrew an earlier FISA court request around possible financial and banking offenses related to the server. So it's leaked. They get this warrant in October, right before the general election. It's leaked the day before the general election to do maximum damage to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They say that their first effort to get a FISA warrant failed, and they went back in October. What changed in October? Was it not the Steele dossier that they used with the federal FISA court to convince a federal judge to issue a warrant? Isn't that what changed?
Well, clearly the dossier was used. It was first and foremost. It was the bulk of the application. What's interesting about that article, like many of these articles, is that we now know that they were somewhat true, but we don't know if everything in that article is true. But clearly somebody somewhere knew that a counterintelligence investigation had been opened and that a warrant had been granted. And I remember that at the time to say, this is no way this is possibly true. But now when you go back and you look at the fact that they used a Yahoo News article that had been done in September to be used also with the FISA court, which is part of what we had in our memo, it really, I think, adds credibility to the fact that somebody was leaking as early as there, too, because that mentioned the opening of a federal investigation.
Well, isn't it true there's a very small circle of people who would know?
Very
There
small.
was a FISA application and a warrant granted. And most of those people would be at the FBI or the Department of Justice.
Well, one of the problems I've had through all of this situation is that, to put it simply, is the FISA court is used to track bad guys, right? Guys that are terrorists, that are looking to steal secrets from the United States, that are working with other bad regimes around the world. But in this case, to open a counterintelligence investigation into a campaign, into politics, is not what the FISA court should be used for. It's not. And then, but I think to your point,
yes,
it has to be at the highest levels of the government to approve a counterintelligence investigation on an American citizen.
FBI director?
FBI director, deputy,
Attorney General?
Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General in the National Security Division, head of the National Security Division.
Do we know if the presidential daily intelligence briefing included this information? I mean, why would it not? Why would they not reveal to the White House what was taking place if it was of such concern in the moment that we have a candidate, according to an opposition research dossier paid for by the Hillary Clinton and DNC campaigns and party, that we have a candidate with ties to Russia? In fact, didn't the White House know, at least generally, what its departments were doing?
Well, I think in the presidential daily brief, there would have been nothing, because remember, there was no intelligence that out there at all, no reporting that said that the Donald Trump campaign was colluding with Russians. There was none of that existed. So it would not have been in the presidential daily brief, which is the intelligence community product, right? Or else we would have known that and said, "Oh, we did have this information that would tie Trump to Russians." We didn't have that.
But how about the fact
of the investigation?
Yes.
That's another question that we still don't have the answers to.
Is it because the executive branch won't let you look at the presidential daily intelligence briefings?
Well, right now we have out a questionnaire that we're waiting for the answers on, and we were just calculating now to see how many people have actually turned it in, and starting this coming week, we will begin to figure out who answered the questionnaire, who didn't. But we're asking those very questions: is when did you know the dossier was funded by the Democratic Party? Did you brief President Obama?
Let's keep walking through this timeline. We have a Guardian article, January 11, 2017. So it's after the election, but before the Senator John McCain passed documents to the FBI Director James Comey last month, alleging secret contacts between the Trump campaign and Moscow, and that Russian intelligence had personally compromising material on the president-elect himself. The material, which has been seen by The Guardian, a liberal British newspaper, is a series of reports on Trump's relationship with Moscow. They were drawn up by a former Western counterintelligence official, now working as a private consultant. We now know that's Christopher Steele. They go on. An official in the U.S. administration who spoke to The Guardian described the source who wrote the intelligence report as consistently reliable, meticulous, well-informed, with a reputation for having extensive Russian contacts. Goes on, the emergence of the documents is potentially explosive. 10 days before Trump's inauguration, on the eve of his first planned press conference since July last year, one more, The Guardian can confirm that the documents reached the top of the FBI by December. Senator McCain, who was informed about the existence of the documents, separately by an intermediary from a Western allied state, dispatched an emissary overseas to meet the source. He has a one-on-one meeting with Comey, and that's not even my point. It's this. According to a source aware of the meeting, the documents, which were first reported on last year by Mother Jones, are also in the hands of officials in the White House. Is it possible that all this took place, that these media reports are out here, public reports, that the Attorney General of the United States, the Director of the FBI, presumably the National Security Advisor, presumably other intelligence agencies and so forth, is it possible that everybody in the Obama administration, or all these senior people in the Obama administration, knew it, and it's public report, and the president didn't know about at least some of this?
So when you go back and look, so don't forget, the FBI knew about the dossier because they were working with Steele to compile the dossier. So they were receiving pieces of the dossier June, July, or I think July, August, September, right. October, November. So the FBI has the documents. By this time, there's already this investigation that's been opened into the Trump campaign. So it's hard to believe when you have all of the people, as you mentioned earlier, signing off on this investigation, how would they not know about the existence of the dossier? And that's one of the things that we're still trying to get to the bottom of.
And a question for me is, why would you keep that from the President of the United States? You know, it doesn't make any sense. If you believed it.
Yeah. Also, you just reminded me of something. Let's also not forget that this was also a product, not just of the FBI who was getting it from Steele, right? But it was also a product of the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. They also had the dossier because they were also paying Steele. Now, remember how we had to find that out. They were paying a law firm
You
that hired a
fought them in
firm
court.
that had to get this in court, that hired a firm that hired the British spy that supposedly went and talked to Russians. So you have the FBI has this document. You have the Democratic National Committee has the document. And I can't imagine that if the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign, if they're paying for this information from Steele, I can't imagine that they weren't shopping it around places, not just to the FBI, but also to various news outlets. And now we know that is, in fact, exactly what happened.
Then we have this piece from McClatchy, January 18, 2017, right before the inauguration. The FBI and 5 other law enforcement and intelligence agencies have collaborated for months in an investigation into Russian attempts to influence the November election, including whether money from the Kremlin covertly aided President-elect Donald Trump, 2 people familiar with the matter said. The agencies involved in the inquiry, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Justice Department, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and representatives of the Director of National Intelligence. According to sources, the working group is scrutinizing the activities of a few Americans who were affiliated with Trump's campaign or his business empire, of multiple individuals from Russia and other former Soviet nations who had similar connections. This is January 17th, 2017. A president's about to be inaugurated. He's still under investigation. The campaign still under investigation. Members of his campaign staff, junior or otherwise, still under investigation. This isn't just a couple of people in the FBI. You're talking about the top law enforcement and federal intelligence agencies of the United States government. You're talking about the Director of National Intelligence. This is an Obama administration-wide effort, is it not?
Right, and so that's 3 days before the inauguration. And don't forget that we don't find out that, and the public doesn't find out until March 20th, when James Comey, the FBI director, in 2017, March 20th, so this is after the president's already been in office, when he decides to publicly come out and say that we've had the Trump campaign under investigation since mid-last summer. The president doesn't even know that. We don't even know that. The American public doesn't know this. And so, but somehow, McClatchy knows this.
And it gets worse. January 19, 2017, New York Times, which is receiving a lot of this information, intercepted Russian communications, part of inquiry into Trump associates. American law enforcement intelligence agencies are examining intercepted communications on financial transactions as part of a broad investigation into possible links between Russian officials and associates of President-elect Donald Trump, including his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Current and former senior officials said the FBI is leading the investigations, aided by the National Security Agency, CIA, Treasury Department. Investigators have accelerated their efforts in recent weeks, but have found no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. They still haven't found any in terms of this collusion. This is the point. One official said intelligence reports based on some of the wiretap communications have been provided to the White House. The White House keeps coming up here. The White House.
That's the 19th?
This is January 19, and everybody believes the New York Times, don't they?
This would be a leak, by the way.
This is a leak.
This is an illegal felony leak.
It's an illegal felony leak that exposes what I would argue is the conspiracy within the Obama administration to take down that campaign. This is Mark speaking. To take down that campaign, to tarnish a president-elect, and to continue the campaign against the president-elect when he becomes president of the United States. We even have a New York Times piece January 12th. NSA gets more latitude to share intercepted communications. So right before they leave, the Attorney General signs off, and the rest of them sign off on raw intelligence information. They say, spread it more widely throughout the government. They didn't do it at the beginning of the Obama administration. They do it at the very end, knowing that Donald Trump is coming in as president, and they claim they don't want this information destroyed. I want your response to that when we return. Chairman, here's the thing. I just went through, what, 3, 4, 5 articles of leaks, of felony leaks, of what is supposed to be secret information. And they leaked this information to try and affect the general election, then the transition, and now the incoming administration. I don't know that anybody's been charged with anything at this point, But what's interesting to me is, when I pointed this out about it, you did too, the media pivoted. Suddenly it wasn't, look how bad Trump is, FISA and all this other stuff. It's a right-wing conspiracy to attack the FBI.
Attack the media.
To attack the media. Mm-hmm. Are you not shocked at the lack of curiosity by the vast majority of the mainstream media in this country of what I would argue is a historical violation of the rule of law, abrogation of our secrecy requirements, and domestic political surveillance that took place? Are you shocked that you're the target of attacks rather than people encouraging you to pursue this?
Well, I'm shocked and I'm scared, not personally, I'm scared for our country. All of the leaks that you just showed, it floors me that no serious investigation has been done on any of this. Mm-hmm. The most serious felony that occurred was the leak of the Flynn Kislyak call, where you had, if you believe the newspaper, the mainstream media, 9 sources supposedly corroborated that information. This would not be complicated for the FBI or DOJ to figure out who the leakers were.
And speaking of that, here it is, February 9, 2017, New York Times again.
I remember this well.
Weeks before President Trump's inauguration, his National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, discussed American sanctions against Russia, as well as areas of possible cooperation with the country's ambassador to the United States, according to current and former American officials. Throughout the discussions, they write, the message Mr. Flynn conveyed to the ambassador, the Russian ambassador, that the Obama administration was Moscow's adversary and that relations with Russia would change under Trump was unambiguous and highly inappropriate, the officials said. So here you have, obviously, Obama officials. They had just signed and placed an order to spread raw intelligence around more broadly. This may not have been part of any FISA application. Maybe it's part of an ongoing surveillance of the Russian ambassador. They pick up Michael Flynn. And what they're supposed to do under our statutes, our FISA statutes and so forth, is to only unmask under very extreme circumstances, and even then, to keep that name protected. And instead, it's leaked. Mm-hmm. And even go further. The accounts of conversations raised the prospect that Mr. Flynn violated a law against private citizens engaging in diplomacy. They're talking about the Logan Act, which has never been successfully used in 200 years. It's unconstitutional.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But here's my question to you. Sally Yates, the former Deputy Attorney General under the Obama administration, she would become the acting Attorney General for a short period under Trump. She kept pushing this Logan Act as an excuse to have a widespread investigation of Trump world.
Well, if you go back, there's actually an article that was written. So it was David Ignatius who first broke this, which was an illegal leak.
Yes.
And then a few days after, maybe a week after, there was another story where they leaked specifics of the call. This was before I believe this was even before the inauguration. And at that time, for there not to have been an immediate investigation of where that leak came from, I mean, that should have been that should have been fire alarms going off everywhere to go and figure out how that leaked out, because this was a very sensitive intelligence capability that we have in this country that nobody seemed to be worried about that this had jeopardized anything. Why? Because they were going after the Logan Act, something that's never been used before, a statute that's never been used. It's a 200-year-old statute. This is really bad stuff that they were up to, and they were willing. It shows that they were willing to use any piece of the law that they could find, including one that's centuries old, in order to justify their illegal leaking, because somehow Michael Flynn was going to be an agent of the Russians. And this is a guy who had a 3-star general who had a storied career.
Let's recap. They get a FISA warrant. A probable cause under FISA is that the targeted individual is suspected of being an agent of a foreign country. So they picked this guy, Carter Page, who had been an FBI informant just a few years earlier against Russia, a minor player in the Trump campaign. They target this guy, and they use the dossier to target this guy, who denies ever having any of the meetings that are mentioned in the dossier with any of these Russian officials mentioned in the dossier. The dossier is funded by the Hillary campaign and the DNC, laundered through a law firm in this Fusion GPS. You've got a person on the Deputy Attorney General's staff, this Sally Yates, who's pushing the Logan Act with respect to another issue, which is preposterous. A top official who reports to her with ties to Fusion GPS, his name is Orr, and his wife works for Fusion GPS and is working on the Trump opposition research. You have a FISA warrant that is issued by a federal FISA court based on opposition research paid for by the opposition campaign, pushed by the FBI under Mr. Comey, pushed by the Attorney General under Loretta Lynch. Now you have the leaking of an individual's name, a three-star general, retired general, Mr. Flynn, who had conversations with the ambassador to Russia, which is not atypical in incoming administration, talking to ambassadors. What are you going to say? We're not talking to you? No evidence whatsoever on the substance of that discussion that he violated anything. You have the same Deputy Attorney General Yates, who has this guy Orr on her staff, pushing to the White House and others the Logan Act, which is nobody's tried the Logan Act in decades. It's so preposterous. Are they not looking for excuses to investigate, excuses to criminalize the election that took place?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of you make a lot of great points, but let me point out a couple that you missed that I think are very important.
I'll tell you what. I want to save time for your full answer, since we only have a few seconds. Talking about FISA and Flynn, what did you want to add there?
Well, what I'd say on the situation of General Flynn is he was doing exactly what he should be doing, which is to talk to ambassadors as they're coming in. Now, reports say that Sally Yates went and briefed the White House about concerns about General Flynn. And what I'd like to know, was Sally Yates, the Deputy Attorney General, really telling the White House at the time that we have General Flynn under investigation for the Logan Act? Did that really happen? I'd like to know the answer to that question. The other issue, you were talking about the FISA court, and you walked through what the FISA court knew, what was used before the FISA court in order to get the warrant on Mr. Page. Let's also not forget that the court was never told that the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign had fully funded the dirt that they were using to get the warrant on Mr. Page.
And we know the Justice Department knew that because they've been working with Mr. Steele. We know the Justice Department was the Associate Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Mr. Orr. His wife worked for Fusion GPS. We know they knew all these things. We know Mr. Comey knew it because when Mr. Comey would meet with President-elect Trump to give him a summary, not a fulsome explanation of what was in the dossier, I believe he called it salacious and something else. So they used a salacious document. Unverified document, not just to get the first warrant, but to extend it several times. Do you know, Mr. Chairman, through these extensions, did they ever tell the FISA court the funding source for the dossier?
No, they did not. And not only that, they used the word, very bizarre, they used the word, and a footnote at the end of the warrant application. They say, we speculate that this could be opposition research. I'm paraphrasing it, but speculate. Nobody was speculating anything. They knew who had paid for it. They knew it, they had the information, and they didn't provide it to the court. This is black and white that the court was not told everything about this. And look, maybe a judge would say, hey, this is fine if the Hillary Clinton campaign paid for this dirt, and maybe he would have granted the warrant anyway. But I find that hard to believe.
You know, Article 1, Congress. Article 2, the executive branch. Article 3, the courts under our Constitution. When our nation was founded, Congress, other than the Supreme Court, created all the other courts. There's no circuit courts in the Constitution. There's no district courts in the Constitution. There's no FISA courts in the Constitution. We had judiciary acts. You determine how many circuits there are going to be, how many district judges there are going to be. Congress determines that, including the House of Representatives. Shouldn't the House Judiciary Committee or some committee within the House or the Senate get to the bottom of this, find out who these judges are? We know who these judges are. I don't care if it's in closed session initially, but an open session ultimately, and find out what these judges knew. We're talking about, in my opinion, the most egregious case of domestic surveillance of an opposition candidate by a president of the United States and his opposition, Hillary Clinton. I don't care what the media have to say or Mr. Schiff have to say or any of the others have to say. You have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to see what's been taking place here. And it's still taking place here. Look, we have an article here from the Business Insider from Friday before last. And it's Susan Rice's lawyer saying, this meeting Susan Rice had on January 5th before the inauguration, it was no big deal. Matter of fact, the attorney representing former national security, and it relates to this, advisor Susan Rice said that Rice memorialized that January 5th meeting. Now, she memorializes it on January 20th, 15 minutes after Trump is inaugurated. She goes back in and inaugurates. You know what we call that, we lawyers call that? Fixing the record. That's what I call it, manipulating the record. But her lawyer says she made the assertion in the letter, in other words, that Obama said, do this investigation by the book, because White House counsel told her to do that. Now, to me, that doesn't make it better. It makes it worse. And they had this meeting on January 5th. And they say Rice was not aware of the Russia investigation at the time of the meeting on January 5th, 2017, according to the lawyer's letter. Mr. Chairman, I just read you 3 or 4 articles about the investigation in the newspapers. How could the Director of National Security advising the President of the United States not know about the Russia investigation when anybody off the street reading a newspaper would have known about the Russia investigation? Why did she write that memo on January 20th after President Trump was inaugurated? They had this big meeting with Obama, and Obama says in this meeting, basically, I paraphrase, be careful what classified information you share with the Trump people, especially Flynn. My argument to you, sir, is this goes right to the top. The president may not know all the particulars, but he had to know a hell of a lot from the public record and from his own people. What do you say?
Well, it's hard to believe that she didn't know that. The letter that she writes to herself on January 20th, so this is hours before the Trump administration comes into power. It doesn't make any sense other than to say it must have been some type of way to justify whatever actions were taken or cover something up. And, you know, this is somebody who has a long history of covering things up or never knowing about anything, if you believe her, including the time where, you know, we had proven that unmaskings had occurred by senior officials in the Obama administration, and she claimed that she didn't know anything about it. So all of this is taking place at the time, so you'd have to really give the benefit of the doubt to the extreme level to believe that she didn't know about this investigation. But you brought up a point which you started with, Mark, that I think is really important. I think and it's historical. Congress not only created these courts, Congress created the FBI and the Department of Justice. And Congress has had a tough time reining the executive branch in.
I want to pick up on this. This is very, very important. I want to pick up on this when we return. We were talking about Congress's role in overseeing the courts, and you were mentioning, yes, in the executive branch. And you've had great difficulty in getting information. Explain, please.
Well, this is going to be the challenge this has been the challenge historically for Congress once they create something. It's hard to oversee it. It's hard to shut it down. It's hard to control it. And I think what our committee has done, what the House Intelligence Committee has done for the first time in a long time, this is with the help of all of our members, on the Republican side at least, who want to get to the bottom, to get to the truth. This is the first time in a long time where you've seen Congress really use our authority, use our power, go all the way to the courts to get information to try to rein in out-of-control bureaucracies. And I just think that, you know, moving forward, this should alarm people at what it's taken for us to get to the bottom of this fiasco that's occurred.
Well, your problem is you're not a reporter for the New York Times. They'd be leaking it to you left and right. You know, you're an official of Congress, and they're much more resistant. You know, speaking of that, you've come under a lot of attack. There was an ethics complaint filed against you, I guess, last year, where you had to basically step aside for half a year, and you were completely cleared. Now, there must have been 2 weeks of reporting on the ethics complaint and about 2 seconds of reporting on the fact that you were cleared. That's right. That was by an organization that was seeking to take you out and remove you as chairman, correct?
Yeah, a known left-wing organization.
Then, in preparation for the program, I looked at the attacks on you, the memorandum that you put out, which essentially says what we've been talking about. And we have the Washington Post Democratic memo discredits Nunes, tantalizes on dossier corroboration. Then we have the Atlantic, the Democratic memo undercuts key Republican complaints about the FBI. Then we have New York Magazine, the Nunes memo is fake and the Russia scandal is very real. It must be very disconcerting and frustrating to you. You know a hell of a lot more than us because you get confidential and secret information. To see what has taken place in the executive branch under the prior administration and frankly continuing the bureaucracy in this administration, and to see one newspaper after another, one opinion writer after another defending it and attacking you.
Well, and don't forget, everything that you have in this pile here, at least those that you just read.
And pile's the right word.
It's a pile of something, I think.
Yes.
This is part of the Democratic Party's network. So what I said this at CPAC the other day. The media in this country is dead. It no longer exists. And the American people need to understand this. I don't know where it's going to all end. I don't know if it's dead forever. But 90% of the media is far left wing, and they are totally reliant. They're totally reliant on getting clicks and playing to their base and to their owners to support what their owners want. And there are very few outlets that are going to give anything that is even a, I wouldn't even say conservative point of view, but even kind of a conservative to mainstream point of view. Those outlets don't exist, and they masquerade. They use the storied names of these great institutions or these great companies like the Washington Post. I mean, it's been around forever. Did a lot of historic work for decades, but it no longer does that. I mean, just the fact that they would cover the Logan Act as if the Logan Act should have been something that was used, and they ate that up from the Obama administration who said, we're looking at the Logan Act, or it was a leak. Just the fact that they would use that and not call them on that should be pretty alarming.
It appears that the media woke up with the possible election of Donald Trump, and it was dormant during much of the Obama administration. Seems to me we have what I call Praetorian Guard media. They're going to protect the Obama administration no matter what that administration did or does. And if the shoe were on the other foot, if this were a Republican administration that did this to a Democratic candidate, it would be the greatest scandal in American history.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine if it was George W. Bush and Karl Rove doing this to the incoming Obama administration, who, by the way, had people that were over in Russia back in 2008. If they said they were investigating the people from the Obama administration, the Obama campaign that were over in Russia talking to Russians and were investigating them for the Logan Act, they would have burnt down the Department of Justice.
Yeah, I agree. Chairman Nunes, where do you and your committee go from here?
Well, we're in what I call phase 2 of this investigation. We're looking at the State Department. From the minute that we announced it, right after that, we had 2 former high-level State Department officials, one who just days after came in a couple different outlets and said that, oh, we knew about Sidney Blumenthal and Corey Scheer.
Who is that?
Well, I think you know Sidney Blumenthal much better than I do, but they are former Clinton, well-known Clinton confidants.
Hacks. We call them hacks, I think.
Who were giving information to the State Department, also giving it to Christopher Steele. So somehow what they've said publicly is that there's this, what appears to be this additional dossier. And this information supposedly was given over to the authorities.
Oh, no, there may be another dossier. Does the FBI have this other dossier?
Well, all we know is this is what we're investigating. We only know so far what these people have said to the media. okay, that they got this information, received this information, were dealing with Christopher Steele. It was something that appears to be another dossier that they got to the appropriate authorities. I'm just telling you what they've said after we announced that we were looking at the State Department. And then we had never named this person, by the way. The next person was this guy named Weiner, who went into the Washington Post and wrote an op-ed about a week later that said, "This is why Devin Nunes is investigating me," which I find to be quite hilarious because we never had started to investigate him. In fact, it was actually Senator Grassley who had mentioned his name, who had an interest in him. But I was glad he volunteered for me to investigate him because he made many of the same comments about Mr. Blumenthal and Mr. Scheer. So we are preparing that piece of our investigation because we want to find out, was the State Department getting in information on American citizens and then feeding that over into the Justice Department? Is
it conceivable that Sidney Blumenthal would know something and Hillary Clinton and her campaign would not?
From everything I can read, he is a close confidant of Hillary Clinton, and if you might remember, he was also involved in sending emails, possibly with classified or sensitive information on them, back and forth to Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State.
But this is widespread. This was widespread, this effort, using government resources, law enforcement, intelligence services, the FISA court, the unmasking of American citizens like General Flynn, as you point out earlier. We really haven't gotten to the bottom of this unmasking either. You have Adam Schiff on TV. He's on TV. I feel like he's on sonar. I feel like he's on airport radar. He's everywhere. He's ubiquitous. And he is constantly trashing what the committee's doing. He's a special pleader for what? I don't know. Do you get along with him? Do you guys talk?
Well, I don't really make it part of my job whether I'm going to get along with these people or not. There's nothing that surprises me in Washington in the swamp. Politicians are going to be politicians, and I just have to deal with them. I'm the chairman, and I deal with these folks. It is amazing, though, that, and some people joke and call them the pathfinders, because they're always looking for a new path to find the Russians. And the irony is that it was the Republicans, it was me specifically, who had warned them about the Russians in April of 2016, essentially that this was coming. And nobody seemed to be interested in it until after they lost an election.
When it comes to the Russians, do they have any interest at all about the Russian relationship with Fusion GPS and the Clinton campaign?
Well, you would think that's the obvious evidence that we have of collusion in this case that nobody seems to be investigating. If Christopher Steele got his information from Russians, that's a pretty good tie between the Clinton campaign and the Russians.
Congressman, thanks for everything.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Keep up the good work. God
Thanks
bless.
for having me on.
You too.